Today, we're going to talk about what it's like to be acquired by a private equity firm. Now, maybe you work for a company that is in the process of being acquired and you don't know what to expect. Or maybe you're an owner of a company and you're wondering if private equity might be the right option for you. Either way, there's a lot of really good questions here that you should know the answers to. And so that's what we're going to talk about today in our video. And stay to the end because at the end, I'm going to give you another alternative that I think in some cases is a vastly better option than going with private equity. All right, so first we got to understand what is private equity. Now in this case, I'm assuming that you're either working for or you own a business that is either being acquired or that you're looking to sell to a private equity fund. So this isn't the same as like venture capital or hedge funds or other things, right? You have a good business or you're part of a good business that's generating good profits and you are looking to sell the whole thing or the vast majority of it to a private equity fund. In that case, you're probably working with a leveraged buyout fund. A leveraged buyout fund is a private equity firm that uses leverage. It uses debt to acquire the businesses that it invests in. So for example, let's say that I have a company that's generating, I don't know, $20 million of cash flow every year, right? And maybe the business is not growing super fast. Maybe it's not growing at all, but it's not shrinking either. And the cash flows are really stable. That makes it a perfect investment for private equity. And the reason for that is the leverage. So when a private equity fund comes in and they buy the company, they're going to use debt as part of that acquisition. It could be somewhere between 60 to 40% of the overall value of the business. So let's say I have a business that's generating $20 million in cash flow. If I sell it to a private equity firm for 10 times cash flow, which, could, depending on the industry, could be a very fair price, then that's a $200 million transaction. If I'm the owner, that could be a great day because I could put $200 million in my pocket, go buy that vacation home down in the Caribbean and retire, right? If you're an employee at a company, you might be really nervous, right? Because you're going to get a brand new owner. And, there's a little bit of the devil you know and the devil you don't there, which if you're an owner could be a really great day. Now, what does that mean though? The private equity firm buys it for $200 million. They're not going to fork out $200 million of their own cash. Like I said, they're going to use debt. So that debt could be upwards of 40 to 60% of the overall $200 million. That means they're borrowing somewhere between $80 and $120 million to acquire that business. Now, somebody's got to pay that back, and it's not going to be the private equity firm. It's going to be the business that they bought. They're going to use the $20 million of profits that business is generating, and they're going to use that money to pay off the debt over time. That could be good and bad. For businesses that haven't had any debt before, though, it can put a little bit of strain on the business. And you read in the news all the time about private equity firms that came in, they saddled a business with way too much debt, and then the business ended up not being able to pay the debt and service the debt, and they ended up having to file bankruptcy, and lots of people lost their jobs. So good examples of that would be like Toys R Us. It was acquired by Bain Capital. Toys R Us went through some tough times. Ultimately couldn't pay the debt. Lots of people lost their jobs. The lawsuit's kind of a big mess. That said, situations like that are more the exception, not the rule. 90% of the time, 99% of the time probably, private equity funds are generating very good returns on their investments, which means that the company is able to service the debt and then oftentimes they're able to improve the actual operations of the business. Now, there are a few other ways that private equity investors make money on their deals. For example, they could be focused on improving the top line growth of the business. Maybe you have a business that hasn't been growing very much and they say, hey, we can help this business grow even faster. We're going to bring them into new markets. We're going to launch new products. We're going to bring some innovation and creativity to really help this business start growing again. And if you're an employee there, that could be great, right? There could be all kinds of new opportunities to grow with a private equity firm. Another way that they could do it is they could say, hey, the business is doing fine in terms of top line revenue, but there is a lot of fat that we need to cut out, right? So maybe there are facilities that are not operating at full capacity, and maybe they shut those down and consolidate operations. Maybe they take operations and they move those overseas because they can reduce their costs on that side. Maybe they cut some of the benefits or they reduce salaries and they move headquarters from a high cost area to a low cost area. There can be a lot of different things that private equity funds do in order to improve the amount of cash or profits that a business is generating. And that's because as the cash increases, it gives them the ability to pay down that debt even faster. And for them, it helps them generate a really good return on their investment. So if you're an employee, it could be good if the private equity fund is coming in and saying, hey, let's grow top line revenue. Or it might be a little bit scary if they're coming in saying, hey, we're going to cut costs across the board. Another way that private equity funds will make money is they'll buy one company and then they'll buy other companies and bolt them on. And they'll do that as a way to cut costs and to increase the overall size of the business. Because as a business gets bigger and bigger, theoretically, it should also become more stable. And as it becomes more stable, it could be worth more. Ultimately, though, if you're working for a company that's being acquired by a private equity fund, you should be aware that these different changes are happening. It could be that, some of the nice perks that you had are going away, but it also could mean that the private equity fund is going to provide more stability to the business. They're going to hold the company more accountable, including the senior leadership, which might be important to you. Hopefully, if they're a good private equity fund, they're also providing some really good oversight and governance to really help the company perform better. And in many cases, private equity funds will come in and they'll create all kinds of interesting option plans and equity sharing agreements with employees. And so it can actually be a definite benefit for current employees that are there, especially if they're working hard and doing a great job. So as you can tell, there are some definite downsides and some risks to private equity and selling to a private equity fund. There can be some really good things. If you're an owner of a business, right, and you're in the driver's seat of deciding whether or not to sell to private equity, it can make a lot of sense, right? Because you can get a big paycheck, cash out of the business, and go buy that retirement home. But you may still be concerned about your employees that you're leaving behind. Sometimes private equity investors will make you roll over some of your equity so you don't get all of it at once. And they may require you to keep operating the business for a few years while they transition you out. So there are a lot of pros and cons. And that's why I wanted to talk just a minute about something that most owners aren't as familiar with, and that is debt. If you're a business owner, you're probably familiar with going to a bank and getting debt. But there are a lot of funds out there that are private debt funds, and they operate similarly to private equity. The big difference is that they will provide debt primarily. Oftentimes they'll provide a little bit of equity, but mostly it's debt into the business. And so, for example, if you have managers that want to buy the business, you could partner with a private debt fund where the private debt fund would provide the debt to your managers, the people that are kind of running day-to-day operations, so that they can then buy the business from you. And in that case, those managers become like the private equity fund. You, as the owner, get a really nice payday, while still ensuring that your employees are taken care of. These private debt funds can be a really great alternative to private equity and definitely worth your time exploring. If you liked this video and it was helpful to you, check out one of my other videos where we talk about what it's like to work in private equity.